And good morning, everyone. This is the Rooftop Sports, and here we are with another Mariners morning talk to reflect everything that has been going on in the past month, pretty much. And as you know, we have a very special guest. Please welcome our friend Dave Softy Mahler of KJR. And Dave, how are you doing today?
How we doing, man? I'm looking around for the special guest. I'm wondering, where's the special guest? What the hell's going on around here? How are you?
Doing great, and it's been a long time because I still remember you from the good old days of the Soto Arena War, and we crashed into each other a few times, and boy, what a time that was.
No, it was amazing, man. The fact that we went through all that, and look, I think all of us would have loved to have seen that arena down there in the Soto area, but no matter what happens with this thing, and they're coming back. We all know they're coming back at some point in time. I think you're talking about probably. I think by the end of this year, if not even earlier, maybe by Halloween, we're going to know that these guys are on the way back, whether it's some kind of an expansion conversation or whatever. But whatever happens, I think Chris Hansen deserves a big pat on the back, right? He deserves a big fist pump because nobody was doing anything until Chris Hansen stepped up from the Bay Area and said, nope, we got to rectify this. And dude, that was 11 years ago now we're talking about, 11 years
12 years ago.
Chris Hansen stepped in to kind of get this thing going and bought the Kings, and you woke up that morning to that news that he had purchased the Sacramento Kings from the Maloof brothers and thought that day they're on the way back, and here we are, and they still haven't officially come back, but they are coming back. I promise you they're coming back.
I talked to Brian Robinson. He said about pretty much the same thing, so I'm very optimistic, but still have that one little ounce of cautious optimism. But before we don't want to talk about too much about the Sonics yet, but we've got some Mariners baseball to talk about. And aside from that win yesterday, oh my gosh, it seems like it was yesterday the Mariners had a 10-game lead, had a very favorable schedule. And next thing you know, Astros are at 4 games ahead, and the Mariners can't even beat any of those bad teams. But somehow they beat the Mets and the Phillies somehow.
Yeah. Well, the Astros have taken advantage of that easy schedule. The Mariners haven't, right? I mean, we talked about that in the show that when the Mariners were 10 games up, we looked at the second half of the year and saw this easy schedule coming. Texas had an easy schedule. Houston had an easy schedule. One of the reasons why everybody had kind of the same schedule strength is because they all play in the same division, obviously, and they're all playing each other, and the division's crap, as you know. So the Astros have taken advantage of it, man, and the Mariners have not. And it's turned into, look, I mean, outside of just a miracle finish here for these guys, what are they, 5.5 games out in the wild card, 4 games out in the West, I think, as of right now this morning. Outside of them rallying, and it's not impossible that they could rally, there's plenty of baseball left, 40 days worth of baseball left. But I think if they don't finish this off and become the first team in the wild card era to blow a 10-game lead in their division, which is 30 years worth of baseball, by the way, I think it'd be a travesty. I think it'd be one of the worst things to ever happen to this franchise. I mean, you're probably not old enough to remember that 97 Mariner offense, the 96 Mariner offense with A-Rod and Edgar and Griffey and Randy and all those guys, and the fact that they had all those Hall of Famers plus Lou Piniella plus Randy Johnson, and they were not even able to sniff a World Series, let alone get to Game 7 of the ALCS. I've often considered that the biggest waste of talent in baseball history. Like, we can talk about a lot of single names that never made the World Series, Ernie Banks, blah, 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 but never that much talent on the same team. This would be right up there. When you talk about this rotation, best ERA in baseball, and not getting into the playoffs to see what these guys can do come October, I think it'd be a tragedy. I think you fire everybody at that point if that goes down like that, and I think it'd be hard for us to get over as Mariner fans. Because right now, man, I think that's what's going on, right? Fans like me and you, I'm sure, are scared to death that these guys are going to miss the playoffs and waste this rotation. And that's what pisses me off.
I was scared to death about this team with the 10-game lead, and everyone said I was insane and nuts. It's like, there's no way they're going to blow a 10-game lead. And here we are. The Mariners also, 2024 Mariners, broke the record, which was actually held, ironically, by the 95 Angels, where they had that 10-game lead, which was actually 13. But the Mariners actually blew that lead much quicker than the Angels did. So Mariners seem to break very unique records that we don't want to hear. But that is the fact that that did happen. And
Yeah.
I did see it coming because this offense just doesn't seem sustainable. We're seeing Mitch Garver not playing well. We're seeing Julio. Well, he kind of picked it up a little bit. But a lot of the pieces are not doing well. And it's to the point that, man, we could use Eugenio Suarez and we could use Teoscar Hernandez. Like maybe if they at least extended that qualifying offer and held on to Gino, because I was not okay with Gino trading Gino. Yes, 200 strikeouts, but he made it up with extra base hits and very clutch hitting.
Well, look, here's the thing. You talk about Mitch Garver not playing well, all those other guys. Nobody's playing well on this baseball team offensively, right? Like, God bless Cal Raleigh and everything he's doing for this team, but Cal Raleigh should not be your best player with a 744 OPS. He just should not. Your best player should be in the 800s, if not in the 900s. And the Mariners have nobody that even comes close to that kind of guy. On a championship caliber team, Cal Raleigh should probably be maybe your fourth or fifth best hitter, if not minimum third or fourth best hitter. And on this team, he's the best thing you got. So it just goes to show you how thin this offense is. And I totally agree with you, man. It's been disappointing for me because it doesn't take much, right? With this pitching staff, and we've said this over and over and over and over. Did I say over again with this team? When you have this kind of pitching staff, and this goes back to 2005, 2006, when they had guys like Felix running around, the only job the offense has to do is just to not suck. And this offense sucks, okay? All you got to do is just be average, be boring, be mediocre. I mean, dude, can you imagine living a life and having a job where your boss comes to you and says, I want you to do one thing. I want you to be mediocre. That's all I want. I want you to be average at what you do. You don't need to be great. You don't need to be a leader. I don't want to pay you a lot of money. I just want you to be mediocre. All you got to do is not suck. Imagine those standards for any of us in what we do for a living. And these guys can't even do that. So it's maddening. It's frustrating, but it's not like we haven't seen this before, dude. I don't know how old you are. I'm 51 years old. I've seen this time after time after time after time, and it's getting really old and it's getting really frustrating, man, because there's no reason why this baseball team, with the pitching they've had over the years, should be the only team left in the major leagues to never have played in the World Series. It's gross.
I'm going to say I'm 32 years old. I at least have a little glimpse of memory when my dad was kind of carrying me around like this when Griffey was being tackled. I didn't really follow the team until 2000, so I have lots of painful memories. The 2000 to 2001, the Bill Bavasi era, which was painful to a certain degree, and also Jack Sorensic era, and now here we are. And other things too is with this team and the core the Mariners have, I really do have a feeling that people like Lou Piniella, people like Eric Wedge, Mike Hargrove, even Bob Melvin, they would have killed to have a team like this. Like, let alone Lou Piniella, he probably would have killed umpires to have a team like this, because Lou always had the great offense, but never seemed to have great pitching, and he would love to have this kind of pitching rotation, and even the bullpen.
Well, yeah, no doubt. And on top of that, he also would be sparring with management over the lack of adding offense over the offseason. That's the thing, is that when Scott Servais and Jerry Dipoto are tight at the hip like they are, like Pete Carroll and John Schneider were for all those years, you're not going to hear a lot of criticism from the dugout. And I think as a manager, you got really one job, and that is to be an advocate for the players and get the most out of them that you can. And I don't think Scott Servais is doing that, man. That's why I snapped last week and over the weekend. I'm not sure how much of the show you listened to, but when he went after Cal Raleigh a year ago, when Cal got frustrated about missing the playoffs, that really pissed me off last season. Because can you imagine Dan Wilson or Jay Buhner or Ken Griffey Jr. or any other Mariner during that era coming out and getting frustrated about the lack of movement by ownership? And then Lou Piniella steps up the next day and says, he's really got to just watch his mouth and control his emotions. He would never say that,
Ever.
And the fact that Scott Servais said that about Kyle Raleigh, dude, just made me snap, dude. I just lost it that day when I heard that from Scott Servais. So that bothered me. I was willing to get over it, right? They were 10 games up. He was doing a good job, I thought, of keeping this team afloat with the lack of offense they had. And now they're just totally falling apart. And I wonder how much of this is because the offense is just continuing to let the pitching staff down, and they're pressing a little bit, right? Like George Kirby's had a good run. Brian Wu has had a good run. Bryce Miller in the last 3 or 4 games, especially on the road, has had a good run. But you're seeing Logan Gilbert, who's supposed to be your all-star, kind of up and down. Luis Castillo, the old man, the OG in that rotation, kind of up and down. And I just think it's wearing on these guys, man. It's really wearing on these guys that they have to go out there every single night and be as fine as they are. I think it's really hard to pitch like that.
It really is. And going back to Scott Servais, I was actually done with him in 2018 after that because he had Robinson Cano, Nelson Cruz, Edwin Diaz, Kyle Seager. A few of them were arguably in their primes and couldn't even break 90 wins. But because the rebuild, I was like, okay, fine. Let's just see how this goes. It was more of the Jack Z core, so fine. But the straw that really broke the camel's back for me was the Robbie Ray decision versus Yordan Alvarez. After that, I was like, no mercy for Scott. I'm like, no, I'm done. So a lot of people finally say they're done now, but I was done with him as long as almost half a decade because like the press conference I see from him, all he says is the same thing. All he says is like, yeah, well, these things happen. It just didn't go our way, but hey, credit to the other team. We'll bounce back. And it's like, you just can't really sense there's like really not much of an urgency. And I think the offense kind of feeds off of that in a bad way where it's like, why play for this guy? Like it almost feels like that no one respects him. Like they probably like the guy. He's a nice guy.
Yeah.
But there's a difference between like and respect. And I don't think anyone respects him at this point.
Well, I've had my moments with Scott. Most of them lighthearted and whatever, fine. I mean, we kind of go after each other a little bit, bust each other's chops a little bit, and I'm actually fine with that, to be honest with you, because I think it breaks up the monotony. I love doing that with Coach Peterson, and I love doing it with Scott Servais. But outside of all that, I think you're right. But the issue at the core of this, really the core of this, is the ownership group. That's the core when it's all said and done. But the other issue, too, is we're sitting here talking about how we don't like Scott Servais' approach. We don't like his approach offensively. We don't like what he does as a game manager when it comes to managing his pitchers late in the game. In that Astro game you talked about with Robbie Ray and Yordan Alvarez in the playoffs, all of those philosophies come from the top. They all come from Jerry Dipoto and the analytic geeks that sit in that room. You ever see Moneyball? It's the same freaking thing. You know, get me a guy that gets on base, right? Because we got all these financial things that we got to worry about. We can't go out and break the bank. Had this phenomenal, awesome free agent class 2 years ago after that Astro series you talked about. And they, for the most part, pretty much ignored it, right? You know, guys like Marcus Simeon, Corey Seager, Carlos Correa, blah, blah, blah. Then they go on to get Teoscar Hernandez, which I like the move. I thought it was a good idea to not give Mitch Haniger the $45 million contract that the Giants gave him because I couldn't trust Mitch Haniger to be healthy to be my right fielder. Then the next year after Teoscar has a decent season for us, they don't pick up the $20 million option, and they go back to the guy that they just literally told us a year before they could not trust to be their everyday right fielder because he always gets hurt. And now all of a sudden he's back in the same spot. And why do they do that? They do that because they got to get rid of Robbie Ray's contract, because they don't want to pay him any money. When you start managing and running a baseball team because you're in it for one reason, and that's the bottom line, to save as much money as possible, to make as much money as possible, when you start building a baseball team based on your checkbook, okay, and not what's best for the roster, these types of things happen. But here's the crazy thing, dude. Even through all this, and as angry and frustrated as we are right now, I still think they got a shot. I still think they have a shot if they can just get their asses into the playoffs to see what this rotation can do. It's not over yet. Now, it might be over in a week or so after the Dodgers series this week. They're 4 games out right now, but I still believe that's why I talked about, hey, man, if you're Jerry Dipoto, do you really trust Scott Servais to bring this thing home for you? Because if you don't, you got to get rid of him yesterday. You have to.
The sad thing is the friendship between them is going to unfortunately prevent that. And I wanted to talk about a little bit about that disastrous road trip. It was that Tigers, the Pirates road trip. And I'm going to say it myself, what stuck out, and I'll give you the opportunity to see what stuck out. But what stuck out to me the most was those 2 Tigers games. Now, the first one I was like, okay, fine. It was a Cy Young caliber pitcher. It just wasn't George Kirby's day. Fine, whatever.
Yeah.
But then Brian Wu and Bryce Miller pitched absolute amazing gems. Like at one point, they actually could have competed for the perfect game or at least a no-hitter. And with barely breaking 90 pitches, and also Brian Wu barely ever breaks 90. When he breaks 80, it seems like a miracle considering his longevity concerns. Scott pulls him out for the bullpen. And next thing you know, in a snap, the game's over. They lost. And then the other thing that stuck out was when Luis Castillo on Friday, he wasn't exactly pitching great, but he was okay, but there was clear signs that he shouldn't have been pitching any longer. And he was going to the 100 and Scott Servais left him in. So I think there's a little bit of a double standard where he lets Luis Castillo do this when he's struggling. But then when Brian Wu and Bryce Miller are pitching absolutely the lights out, they have to save his arm for the quote playoffs that may not even happen.
Yeah, totally agree with you. And I'll take it one step further. Brett Boone does a weekly show with us on Thursdays, and he's of the opinion that you need to start managing every game now like it's the postseason. I don't know if I totally agree with that, but I don't disagree with it either. But we know one thing, that Scott's not doing that at all, right? And the organization's not doing that at all, because you mentioned Bryce Miller and Brian Wu. I think Bryce was at 90 and Wu was at 85 when they pulled him out in those 2 games that you're talking about. So they're very conservative with their starting pitching staff right now in late August when every game is huge. But they're also willing to roll the dice on Julio Rodriguez's ankle and bring him back when he clearly is not ready yet to play. Look, if he were 100% healthy, he'd be playing the outfield right now, right? We all know that, okay? They need him. They need his defense out there, whether Robles in right, him in center, or vice versa, whatever you want. They need to have those guys out there. So I think it's kind of a confusing mixed message for me because, look, you limit Bryce Miller and Brian Wu to get to this point today where they're healthy late in the summer with 40 whatever games left to go. You're still babying those guys like it's April, but you're pushing Julio Rodriguez like it's do or die, which doesn't make any sense unless you just have that much faith in your bullpen, which I think we both can agree is ridiculous because the bullpen has been spotty at best lately. So that bothers me. The Andres Munoz decision the other day when he said if they had taken the lead, he would have brought him back in the game. Look, man, Scott, at that point, you got to do whatever you can to keep that game right there against the Tigers. And they didn't do that, and it blew up in their face. So he's just been constantly pushing the wrong buttons with this pitching staff. No question about it. I even think pinch hitting, he's pushing the wrong buttons. When he brought Garver in for Rayleigh, was it last week or whatever, just a couple of days ago, when Garver, the day before, had been talking about getting death threats from baseball fans, and now he's bringing them in a high-leverage situation with a spotlight as hot as it can be. So those things just kind of like, wow, really? It's like, are you just looking at a little piece of paper like, Mike Leach used to have that little small Post-it note playbook on the sideline? A happens, go to B. D happens, go to Z. It just kind of feels like he's just pushing buttons on the computer. And there's no human element. There's no feel for the game for this guy. Because all of us are sitting at home going, this doesn't feel like the right. Hell, man, the other night against Detroit, the leadoff walk, and Dave Sims is even on the air. Dave freaking Sims is on the air saying, yeah, you kind of had a feeling after that leadoff walk. I mean, even the guys that work for the team are admitting it on the air that there's bad vibes right now around these guys. So, look, we'll see what happens the rest of the way, obviously, but just an absolute disastrous trip to Detroit and Pittsburgh, dude. To go 1-5 against those two teams that both of them have waved the white flag. We know that, okay? And then he faced a guy with the Pirates, I think, on was it Saturday?
Saturday.
Yeah, the dude that came in.
Bailey Falter.
He had a lot of run in like 6 consecutive games. They got the bases loaded, Julio on second, nobody out, couldn't get him home. You're facing a team that's lost 10 straight, and you give them 2 right away to win the series. Just a disgrace. Absolute disgrace. Here I am. It's Monday. The weather's nice. I'm hoping to be in a good mood, and you're pissing me off already. Before I've even gone on the air, you're getting me all fired up, man. Come on, it's not even 9:30 yet. Holy hell.
Think of it as an alarm clock, man.
This is like therapy, dude. My wife is gonna thank you for taking this out on you and not on her.
Hey, I'll take it. I mean, I'll take it for the show. But thankfully the road trip did end with a dominant performance by the offense. And we all needed that badly because imagine what our show would have been like had the Mariners not won. I think we would have both gone nuclear on this team together to the point we would have been arguing with each other about basically the same things we would agree on.
Yeah. Well, and look, here's the thing, man. You know how funny baseball is. You got this Dodgers series coming up. Okay, you win 2 out of 3, you lose 2 out of 3. Just don't get swept. But then you got San Francisco, who's not very good. You got the Angels, who's not very good. You got the A's coming up, who obviously stink. You got Tampa Bay, who's already kind of given up. You know, they've got rid of, you know, a ton of their good players. And then you got the Cardinals, who are scuffling, the Rangers. I mean, there is a gap here, man, between Friday and like the middle of September, where you've got an opportunity, if you can just pull your head out of your ass, to play some teams that might actually start bringing up some young guys in September, and you may not even see a real major league roster on the opposite side. But like we've said, when you're playing bad baseball, it doesn't matter who you play, man. It doesn't matter who you're playing when you're playing terrible baseball. So, I mean, here I go again, referencing the schedule and how easy it is in the final month and a half of the year. But it's been easy on paper for the last 2 months, and they haven't done jack squat with it. So probably won't matter at all.
Nah, and actually, I'm just looking at it as a tough schedule. I mean, I go as simple like when I was competing in my softball tournament a couple weeks ago, I noticed that there was a team ahead of us, and they were actually a team that we always dominated. And this was like in our semifinals. And I was reminding the team, I was basically pretending to tell them, hey, they just sprung over a couple guys from like Venezuela or Cuba. Let's treat it like that. Do not underestimate this team, and let alone we destroyed this team because we did not let our guard down. And that's exactly the Mariners should be doing. But instead, they allowed Bailey Falter, who doesn't even strike out guys. And when I looked at his Savant page, he was pitching nothing but fastballs up the middle, and the Mariners could only foul at best. So hopefully the Mariners can figure this out, especially at least after hopefully they figure out the Dodgers series. And wanted to touch into the Dodgers series. And I remember you said that you do have a belief that they will win this series. Even a part of me might believe that, but why do you believe that?
Because I had too much Kraken rum before I went on Twitter. Maybe a little too much Tito's. No, look, dude, here's the thing. Because the minute I start calling for a manager to be fired, the team goes on a run. It's just, I've been doing this for 30 years, whether it's a coach, whether it's a manager, college football, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Guys start getting into that area where I start calling for their heads or start wanting to make a move. Boom. That's where things switch. So you're welcome, number one, because 2 things are going to happen. Either A, they're going to fire the guy very soon, or B, they're about to go on a big-time run with these guys. So I just feel like it's me. It's just kind of what I do, right? Like when I start calling for people to be let go, they find a way to turn things around. Not that they hear what I'm saying, not that Scott Servais is right. Actually, he may be the one guy that does know what I'm talking about because he follows a lot of this stuff on social media, by the way, trust me. I just think that baseball's funny like that, right? Baseball is really funny like that, where you got a baseball team right now that is on the edge of their heels. They're desperate. They need to win. They need to find a way to get at least some good vibes going. Play well, against LA before the kind of crap that we talked about starts rolling into their schedule. So I just wouldn't be surprised by it. But in the end, if the Orioles, if Kansas City and Minnesota and Boston and Houston don't start losing, it's not going to matter, right? I mean, the Mariners right now, you mentioned the Angel collapse in 95. Right now, they don't just need to go on a run. They need a couple of teams in front of them to fall apart. And that's the bad news about the situation they're in. It's not just about them anymore. Now they're relying on somebody else. I mean, to lose 14 games in the standings in the last whatever it is, month and a half to Houston, pathetic, unacceptable. And now you're in a position where you need to be babysat like children, and you need somebody else to fall apart so you can even think about making the playoffs. It's disgusting.
Yeah, they'll have to absolutely make a run even more unprecedented than 95, and that was considered an unprecedented run, but they're going to have to do something where, and they have the opportunity, like we agree, they have a favorable schedule, even though that may not matter, but as long as they can somehow figure it out, this team can be in the playoffs, and they should be able to make the playoffs. And I do think that this season's also a great opportunity to even compete for the World Series, because look at the entire league. We don't exactly see dominant baseball teams right now. Not even the Dodgers. They're still clinging on to a slight lead. Yankees and Orioles, they seem to be exchanging leads. Like, no one's really running away with it. look at our division. Texas seemed to have taken a year off because everyone decided to get hurt, and maybe they got fat and happy from the World Series last year. But this feels like the opportunity, because when we go into next season, you assume that Houston's going to keep it rolling. Texas will probably bounce back. And then you have even Oakland. I know you said that they stink, but they've actually played better in the second half. And who knows if they're actually going to play better.
Well, nobody's rolling over, right? I mean, I just think you're talking about some teams that may start bringing some young kids up. But, I mean, you're right about the offense. And, look, obviously this series with the Dodgers, with they got Walker Buehler, who's made one start in the last 2 months, I think, coming off the IL. So I don't think we even know what he's all about. Flaherty and Stone are both very good, right? So the offense is going to be at a premium in those game 1 and game 3 against LA. But I don't know, man. Maybe I'm just a sucker, right? I mean, all of us just want to cling to hope, right? We all want to cling to the idea that these guys can find a way to turn it around. They've played such bad baseball for the last couple of months, or again, month and a half, that you look at the way they've performed over the last maybe 45 days and think, well, hell, that's a team that should be 10 games under 500. That's a team that should be, 8 or 9 games out, and their season should be literally over. But no, through all the crap that they've been throwing up there, they're still only 4 games out in the division. And you think at some point the Astros are going to cool off. At some point the Mariners are going to heat up. The cycle is going to start going back the other way, like watching a basketball game where a team's down by 20 and just expends a buttload of energy to get down 3 or 4 points and just can't finish it off. And you wonder if that's what's going to happen now with this baseball team. So, look, I mean, I still believe that the Mariners are a dangerous team if they can get into the postseason tournament in October. I think they're way more built for the playoffs, I think, than they are the regular season, right? And maybe it's not going to matter when it's all said and done because of the offense, but I just think it would be an absolute tragedy to not see what these guys could do come playoff time. And then the other point, just kind of get into the offseason a little bit here. At some point, no matter what happens this year, to get the offense they're looking for, they're going to have to probably move one of those starting pitchers. And that really angers me. And we can reconnect then, but I just go back to when they had to move Michael Pineda for Jesus Montero. And Michael Pineda didn't turn out to be great. Jesus Montero didn't turn out to be great. It was kind of a lose-lose, kind of a nothing burger for both the Yankees and Mariners at that time. I think Jesus Montero is more known for throwing an ice cream sandwich at a scout at a minor league baseball game than he is anything else, to be honest with you. But that's what this organization does, because they don't want to buy the hitters, because they can't develop the hitters. They need to go out and trade pitching to get them. And maybe the Cole Youngs and the Harry Fords in the system will keep them from having to do something like that. But, dude, think about all the moves they made over the offseason with their pitching staff, their offense, and now think about how many holes they still have with their offense, right? I mean, you're likely going to need a first baseman. You're going to need a DH. You're looking at probably a third baseman, probably a second baseman, right? I mean, J.P. Crawford at short, Rosarina left, Robles probably gets the first crack in right, although I don't know if you just automatically give it to him. And then Julio, I mean, the only spots that you feel, I think, really good about next year are probably Julio, J.P. Crawford, and Cal Raleigh, right? And then maybe a Rosarina in left field. That's about it. So that's just really, it saddens me that after everything they did over the offseason, they're still sitting here, man, looking at a ton of holes for this offense next year. Tons.
And I remember at the end of 2023, we were saying that there were holes on this offense. And boy, imagine, it's crazy to think that the 2023 team, if they were playing this season, they would be running away with this division easily, especially with a healthy Brash. And we wouldn't have to worry about Santos because we would have had we would have had Topa, I guess, because they wouldn't have had to trade for like Jorge Polanco. So it's crazy to think that what happened just a year ago, we were saying that this team needed an upgrade.
Yeah,
it's just
bad.
bad.
I mean, look, you're talking about a team last year that obviously was a much better hitting team than this one is. I think by about 35, 40 points, by the way. You can do the math on that for me and look it up and confirm that. But I think the Mariners were about a 240 hitting team a year ago, and now they're barely over 200. So you're exactly right. Just give us a below average to mediocre offensive baseball team, and these guys have no problem Look at what they've done against the Tigers and Angels. What is it, 2-9, 2-10, whatever it is, the last 12, going back to that 4-game series to end the first half of the year. I mean, you go 500 against those guys, and you're tied. You flip it around. You have a 4 or 5 game lead right now against Houston. So all those what ifs, it's kind of that's kind of what life as a Mariner fan is all about. What if this? What if that? What if Arthur Rhodes had gotten that pitch against David Justice in the 2001 ALCS? What if they had, kept Griffey and traded A-Rod and gotten something for him instead of letting him walk away as a free agent, dude? I mean, you want to bash your head against the wall thinking about this stuff. And this goes back 40 years, man. You're lucky you're 32 and not 51 like me because you don't remember all of it.
I did read all the books, and the one that really got me fired up when I was reading, and actually I was laughing more than I was angry, but it was that Tino Martinez trade where it was like, we celebrate 95, we just got our stadium, and then was like, oh yeah, the consolation prize too is we're trading Tino Martinez. Thank you for your support. And then the 2000s, which I did live that, of course, but I wasn't old enough to understand like the politics and the business. But that whole Howard Lincoln saying our goal is not to win a World Series, it's to field a competitive team year after year, blah blah blah.
Right.
And then Lou Piniella's fallout with the management, and then Jeff Nelson, where he went off, he immediately gets shipped to the Yankees because of his quote insubordination. It just list goes on, and I know that we wanted to keep it to 45 minutes, so we have about 14 minutes left, and I wanted to talk about like ownership, management, the future. And before we get started on that, the fun fact, and it's a terrifying fact, I just happened to search the Mariners front office just for fun on their website.
Yeah.
We remembered the two nightmares of Howard Lincoln and John Ellis. John Ellis, the 90s CEO, Howard Lincoln, CEO from the 2000s to 2016-15. They are still on this organization as board members, so it seems that they still have just as much influence as they did back in the good old days.
Well, I just think it's just all about it's just the DNA, right? I mean, whether John or Howard have any ultimate authority over this team. Chris Larson's been around forever. John Stanton's been around forever. These guys have all had a hand in this, whether directly, indirectly, authority, little power, lots of power. It's the DNA. And the DNA of these guys all seems to be the same, right? All of it. That they just, for some reason, don't have that super duper passion to win a World Series. And I believe an owner is responsible for a baseball team like you and I are responsible for our families, right? I mean, we're stewards, right? I mean, they are stewards of a public trust that means more to the masses than it does to them. And if they can't get it done, then get out and let somebody else buy the baseball team that can. All you're looking for is for the amount of passion that we have to be reflected in the ownership group. Right. And the Phillies have an owner. I'm not sure if you've heard this guy talk or not. Philadelphia's got an owner that has literally come out and said, nobody gives a damn how much money I make. It's about rings. It's about World Series titles. And they fired Joe Girardi May 31st of 2 years ago, gave the job to Robbie Thompson, and they went to the World Series. Right. I just identified it wasn't going to work, and they got rid of the guy. So I don't know what these guys think about or what they do when they're, sleeping at night, what they dream about. I dream about going to a World Series. I dream about this baseball team in the playoffs and this rotation doing damage. And I think these guys dream about a business, and they dream about budgets and dollar signs. I mean, the RoofTopSports thing is an absolute disaster for them financially. There's no question about that. Everything's going away. No Kraken, no Blazers, no nothing. It's all falling apart. There's no need to watch that network whatsoever if you're not watching a Mariners game. So it's disgusting. I mean, just imagine, a Steve Ballmer or a Jeff Bezos owning this baseball team. All of the money in King County that we see right now, all the tech billionaires in this area, and getting one of them to be the primary owner and being able to spend $400 million a year on payroll, that ownership group would make the Steinbrenners look like pilgrims. It'd be embarrassing. The Mets. I mean, we would be the talk of the town, dude, when it comes to ownership and the amount of money they could spend. So it drives me crazy because I think the fans deserve better. They deserve better than what they've gotten from this ownership group, and the lack of passion that seemingly they have, that they don't have, that we have, is really infuriating. And it's the same message every year, man. I mean, this conversation that you and I are having right now, we could have this conversation 10 years ago. We could have this conversation 15 years ago. I mean, What year is this? Is this the early 90s or is this 2024? Is this
Same thing.
I mean, I honestly, like, we could replay conversations from the air, go on the air and replay it, and outside of my voice changing over the years, you'd have no idea what the hell year it is, man. So that's what pisses me off.
It really does, unfortunately, and makes me wonder, like, imagine if, like, the ownership had even a tenth of a passion of, like, a Paul Allen. The Yankees dynasty doesn't even happen, and the Boston Red Sox probably doesn't even break their curse, and that's what the Mariners did. They built a Yankees dynasty and ended a Boston curse that lasted almost 100 years, which, by the way, was considered impossible to allow to happen. But hey, Mariners at least did something for something, and we can talk about this whole ownership thing as much as we want. Like, we kick it like a dead horse. I kick it like a dead horse on much of the nostalgic videos that I make, where I basically point out ownership like 24/7. But after this season, if let's do a scenario game, because we only have like 9 minutes. So we all agree that if Mariners fail to make the playoffs, gotta clean the house, gotta get them out of here. Everyone's gotta go.
Yeah.
Now, what if Mariners make the playoffs?
Yeah.
We're just gonna do it scenario by scenario. What do you do with the organization, the front office, management? They make the playoffs, make the wild card, of course.
Right.
But then they wimp out.
Yeah.
What do you do with them?
Personally, I'm moving on from everybody at that point, because that's not good enough. That's not why we went through those 4 or 5 years of losing to just go to the wild card series and lose.
How about the American League Championship Series? They make it to that, but then they lose.
They get to the ALCS, I think you bring everybody back. I think baseball's such a crapshoot come tournament time. You know, I mean, look, the D-backs won 88 games last year and made the World Series. We've seen a lot of teams, you know, that have not had the best record in their league make the World Series. So it is such a crapshoot. But I think you're still talking about a baseball front office that does not know how to build an offense, or does not have the resources from the ownership group to build an offense. I mean, dude, Mitch Garver is still under contract for next year. Mitch Haniger's got a player option for next year. There's a team option on Polanco that they probably will not pick up for next season, although Steven Souza thinks they should. They're just going to have a lot of work to do offensively next year. So what makes us believe that this can change next year, where they can bring all these pitchers back who, let's face it, outside of Brian Wu missing a couple of stints here or there, they've stayed relatively healthy, right, these guys? Are we going to get this kind of a run again from this rotation next season? As we said, you may have to trade one of them. Castillo's getting older, no question. Wu's been banged up. So you got to strike while the iron's hot. And right now, you know you have a dominant rotation, and you're not taking advantage of it. And you tried to do some moves at the deadline, but there's no team in baseball that can fix every hole they've got at the deadline when they have as many holes as the Mariners did, because of their lack of effort in free agency in the last couple of years. And it's not just about last year. I get so tired when people come up to me and say things like, well, who did you want them to go after over the offseason? There was nobody there. Okay, how about 2 years ago? How about 3 years ago? How about 4 years ago? How about all the moves the Mariners could have made 2 or 3 years ago that would bring them players that would be helping them right now? Because remember, when the Rangers went after Marcus Semien, when they brought him in, they didn't win right away. It took a couple years to get to that World Series championship with Marcus Semien. But because they signed him 2 years earlier, they had him. So this is not just about this last offseason, man. This is about going back 3, 4, 5 years of just ignoring the free agent market, having to go out and get a player with an asterisk. Yeah, we'll bring in Polanco, but he's been suspended. Yeah, we'll bring in Haniger, but he's been banged up. Yeah, we'll bring in Garver, but he really hasn't been an everyday player for the most part with Texas. Everything's got a but, and I'm sick and tired of it.
The insane part about Mitch Garver that really gets me is that the fact that the Mariners traded away Eugenio Suarez and Jared Kelenic, which was to get rid of Marco Gonzalez and Evan White.
Right.
They saved all that money just to get Mitch Garver, which really just blows my mind. Like, we gave away 2 key players just to get one half butt kind of a player. And now,
well, remember, the 2 pitchers they got from the Braves both blew their elbows out. Okay, so they did
Jackson Kowar, and then Cole Phillips, I think.
Yeah, they did get 2 guys from Atlanta that hopefully in an alternate universe somewhere would be playing a role in this bullpen, but they both blew their arms out and they had Tommy John surgery. So You're right. I mean, that deal netted them absolutely jack squat when it was all said and done. You know, moving on from Eugenio Suarez, I know he hasn't been great for the D-backs. I didn't like it at the time. He has picked it up. Teoscar, I hated that whole thing with Teoscar Hernandez. I just didn't get it. Every other move they made, though, getting Polanco, I was fine with. Getting Garver, I was totally fine with. Moving on from Kelnick, I had no problem. I think Kelnick needed a change of scenery big time. I think he had to get the hell out of here as much as the Mariners. I mean, he never would have done anything here in Seattle is my point. So I had no problem with that. The Teoscar Hernandez thing made no damn sense. Made zero sense whatsoever. Because at least you make the offer, the $20 million offer. I think he took a couple $1 million more with the Dodgers. If not
20. Mistaken. I think he took 23.
Right. So just a few $1 million more. But going to a place where, you know, let's face it, stuff's expensive, right, in LA, and there's an income tax in California. So maybe it's a net, you know, for him. But get him to say no. Get that comp pick from the Dodgers, which I think would have been between the second and third round in just last year's draft. And you move on. And they won't even do that because they were afraid. They were afraid he would say yes. Can you imagine being afraid of Teoscar Hernandez saying yes to a $20 million contract after what he did for you a year ago? And hindsight 2020, but what he's doing now. Oh, we don't want Teoscar to say yes to a $20 million deal. Are you kidding me? You'd cut your hand off to have Teoscar Hernandez right now on this baseball team. And I'm not even talking about this year's Teoscar. I'm talking about last year's Teoscar. You'd cut your hand off to have that guy. So he strikes out. Big deal. Everybody's striking out on this team. The whole freaking team is striking out. Right now, they're sitting at home. You know what they're doing? They're striking out, getting ready for the game with the Dodgers. That's what they're doing.
They're playing a video game and striking out.
That's exactly the point. And if they're not striking out, they're talking about striking out. If they're not talking about striking out, they're thinking about striking out.
Some are playing wiffle ball with their kids, and that kid's striking them out.
They're striking out. Terrible, man. Just terrible. Again, I was in a good mood until I came on this show. Thank you very much.
Well, hey, at least you got out of your systems, and maybe you'll be in a little better mood for your show. So maybe you'll sound better, unless your audience probably does like to hear the fiery side of you, because that video on Twitter was like, yep, that's the Softy I know and love, and something that other sports radios, I don't want to name them, or other Mariners content creators, they may not want to do that because I guess they don't want to upset their audience. But both of us, I think we just say it as it is. We don't like sugarcoating. We're not cheerleaders. No. We're passionate Mariner fans that have been around for 20 to 30 years, and we just want to see a World Series. Just give us a World Series and we'll be happy.
Let us die young. In my case, senior. Look, man, I just think when it's all said and done, we're angry because we care. People are angry because they care. The Mariners should be on their hands and knees loving the fact that people are this pissed off about what's going on, because the next possible alternative is apathy. And there's nothing worse than apathy. You've seen this baseball team when the fans are apathetic. I've seen Husky football when the fans are apathetic. I've seen Seahawks. I've seen everything when the fans don't give a damn, and it's brutal, right? And the fact that we are still finding it in ourselves to wake up and talk about these guys and, you know, conjure up this kind of emotion, I think is good for business. And I wish the Mariners would think that with their Root Sports programming. I mean, I'm not sure how much you watch the White Sox post-game shows with guys like Ozzie Guillen on NBC that carry the games, and they stink. And then Ozzie Guillen and company go bananas on the post-game show because it brings in ratings. You want to own a TV network, you own a TV network to make money. The way to make money is to bring in ratings. And you're not bringing in ratings when you got people on the air that are not allowed to criticize the baseball team for fear of their job. These are all great people. Trust me, all of them. And they've got a job to do. They work for the damn team, for God's sakes. I'm not blaming them. I'm just saying that the Mariners, if I'm the owner of the Mariners, I'm telling my people, I'm telling Brad Adam, Angie Mentink, Tom Glasgow. Hey, go nuts. Have at it. Show that passion. Show that passion on the air. Show the fans that you are just as passionate as they are. That's what we want. And if it's fair criticism, I don't care if it's fiery, emotional, just don't make it personal. But if it's fair criticism, go for it, because that brings in ratings and it brings in people. We want people to know that we care as much as they do, and they do none of that. And it's ridiculous. I'm done. See you, man.
Thank you very much for being on the show, Softy. And 45 is up, and let's hope they win this freaking series and make the playoffs.
Take care.
Take care. Have a good day. And that's going to do it for us. And everyone enjoy your Monday and enjoy this weather. And thank you very much once again for being on this show. And let's hope the Mariners figure this out. And I am calling it. And I would go through the comments, but I got to go myself. Good day.